In 1513, a man named Niccolò Machiavelli sat at a rough wooden table on his modest estate in Sant'Andrea in Percasina. After years of diplomatic victories and intimate access to the most powerful rulers in Europe, he found himself exiled, stripped of influence, and cut off from any meaningful income. Every evening he performed a strange ritual. He shed his dirty, dust-soaked farming clothes and dressed himself in the formal robes he had worn at the courts of kings. In that secluded study, he held conversations with the great minds of antiquity, building a treatise that 500 years later would become the operating manual for those who hunger for real power. He understood something that millions of modern people, locked inside glass offices and open-plan co-working spaces, completely fail to grasp. Wealth and power do not flow toward those who simply grind harder. They flow toward those who first rewire their internal architecture.
But that was only the first devastating insight, waiting for anyone bold enough to stare directly into the abyss of reality. If that Florentine secretary walked into a modern workspace today, he would see a room full of people spending 12 hours a day hunched over laptops. They post motivational quotes between Zoom calls and genuinely believe their busyness is evidence of progress. Machiavelli would not be confused by the spectacle. He would be quietly amused, recognizing them as the same frantic, low-level functionaries cluttering the halls of Florence. They are making the same mistake that has been made for 5 consecutive centuries. They are confusing activity with advancement. They are moving without direction, staying busy without strategy, and burning themselves out without measurable results, because their foundational beliefs are fundamentally broken. But the real cause of their stagnation runs far deeper than any lack of discipline or bad luck. Machiavelli observed that people rarely change voluntarily unless discomfort forces their hand, because habit always feels safer than truth. But comfort does not protect you. It just makes your decline smoother and less visible until it is too late. Real growth begins with friction and resistance, never with the approval and applause of those around you. If the ideas behind your supposed success feel comfortable, they lack the power to move you. Building 8-figure wealth requires a complete identity inversion, a total overhaul of how you make decisions. This demands a deliberate break from the conventional logic drilled into us for decades. Most people operate on a deeply flawed mental model, the have-do-be sequence. They assume that once they have money, they can do meaningful things, and only then will they become someone significant. But reality works in reverse. Every attempt to cheat this law ends in collapse, betrayal, or losing everything you gained. You cannot fake your way into sustained outcomes that do not align with who you are at your core. Your identity is the foundation. It either holds your success together under pressure or lets it crumble at the first sign of a crisis. But recognizing this truth is just the opening blow against the comfortable worldview most people desperately protect. Everything operates within hard constraints: time, energy, and physical capacity. Any project worth executing needs space to develop, and any wealth worth holding requires ongoing effort to maintain. Yet most people try to speed up the process while refusing to transform themselves along the way. They want power before they become the kind of person capable of holding it when circumstances get brutal. Machiavelli saw this play out repeatedly with princes who seized cities without the inner fortitude to defend them, only to lose them just as quickly. Building anything real requires constructing an internal foundation before any external reward shows up. The moment you commit to building something significant, reality responds with immediate resistance. Problems multiply, friction increases, and obstacles appear without warning. Many make the mistake of reading this resistance as a signal to retreat or proof that they are doing something wrong. In reality, it is direct confirmation that you have entered the arena and begun pushing back against entropy. Everything in the universe drifts toward chaos and decay. Leave anything unattended, and it deteriorates. Creating order demands a level of intentionality and consistency that most people cannot maintain for more than a few weeks. Fortune favors the bold, but people consistently forget the second half of that principle. Only the disciplined survive what happens after the first bold move toward a meaningful goal. In the early stages, results are invisible, and market feedback arrives with an enormous lag. Social validation is the final stage, showing up precisely when you no longer need it. Most people quit during this silent interval because they cannot find the internal reserves to keep moving without external validation. But it is exactly in this gap, between a new identity and your first tangible results, that your entire trajectory is decided. A concept called deferred compensation explains exactly why the wealthy keep compounding while everyone else stays stuck. The capital at the top today is often the payment for years of work that generated zero visible return at the time. Those at the apex value time far above money. Those at the bottom are obsessed with cash, hemorrhaging time without a second thought. This single inversion explains success far more accurately than raw talent or connections. Short-term thinkers cling to liquidity, while strategic thinkers protect their primary asset, time. The moment this understanding penetrates your thinking, you see opportunities where everyone else sees dead ends. But that is only the first step. The truths still to come are far more dangerous to average assumptions. Once you accept that identity comes first, it is time to confront a harder reality, one that many find offensive. Ordinary hard work does not produce extraordinary results. The world does not pay for effort, it pays for value delivered. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago when he studied the mercenary armies of 16th century Italy. A soldier's physical strength mattered, but the wealth and glory went to the commander who knew where to direct it. Value exists across 4 distinct levels, each carrying a hard ceiling on compensation. Most people burn through decades without ever realizing which rung of the ladder they are stuck on.
But understanding this hierarchy is only the beginning. Behind it lie the mechanics of real scale. At the lowest level sits execution, where you trade time and physical energy for a specific, measurable output. It is honest, essential labor, but it carries an absolute ceiling that cannot be broken by effort alone. Regardless of how hard you work, there are only 24 hours in a day, and physical reserves inevitably deplete. A laborer pouring concrete at 6 in the morning may outwork everyone in the city, but his income is permanently capped by his presence on the job. The moment he stops showing up, the cash flow stops. His existence becomes an endless survival grind. This is the level of subsistence. It earns respect, but it never produces genuine freedom. But recognizing this trap is only the first step. The second rung is coordination, where you stop doing everything yourself and begin organizing people, processes, and systems. This is where managers and team leaders operate. People who understand that collective output always exceeds individual contribution. Machiavelli wrote that power belongs not to the strongest person in the room, but to the one who knows how to channel the strength of others toward a precise objective. Many operators resent watching a coordinator earn multiples of their income without touching the physical work. They call it unfair, but what they are actually seeing is the price of leverage and the weight of accountability. The executor gets paid for the volume of work produced. The coordinator gets paid for the accuracy of their decisions. But even here, a ceiling exists, built from the compounding complexity of managing people. The third level of the value hierarchy is communication, where the primary currency becomes ideas, language, and influence. At this stage, you are no longer managing processes directly. You are moving masses of people through meaning and framing.
This is where deals get closed in boardrooms, where a handful of precisely constructed sentences can be worth more than a year of work from hundreds of people. Machiavelli was a master of language, understanding that the perception of reality often outweighs reality itself in determining outcomes. Salespeople, negotiators, and content architects can generate from a single contract what an average worker will never accumulate in an entire career. Their output is not measured in sweat, it is measured in the scale of the consequences their words set in motion. But even that summit looks modest compared to what sits at the very top. The highest level is imagination, the domain where entirely new systems are designed, and the rules of the game everyone else lives by are written. At this level, you are not merely influencing people, you are engineering the environment in which they think, act, and make decisions. Every application on your phone and every financial system you interact with is the product of someone's imagination, made operational. Rule makers always stand above rule followers, extracting the primary share of resources from the infrastructure they built. These are the world architects Machiavelli described as the greatest lawmakers in history. Most people never attempt to climb this ladder, clinging to the belief that relentless effort at the bottom will eventually carry them to the top. But that is only the first assault on their illusions. Behind it lies the full weight of understanding leverage. There is a paradoxical law at work. Generating life-changing wealth in a compressed time frame is often structurally easier than grinding for pennies over a lifetime. Small money demands constant physical presence, unrelenting tension, and a daily battle for every marginal dollar. Big money demands systems, precision, and mechanisms that generate output without your direct involvement. One path scales exhaustion, the other scales leverage. Accepting this idea is frightening because it transfers complete responsibility for your position back onto your shoulders, leaving nowhere to hide. If wealth is fundamentally a question of operating at the right level of value, staying broke becomes a personal choice. The moment that accountability mechanism engages, your standards shift at a pace that will surprise even you. But that is only the foundation for recognizing the invisible cost accumulating every single day you delay. Accepting leverage brings you face to face with the scarcest resource in existence: undivided focus. In a world where thousands of distractions compete for every second of your attention, the capacity for deep concentration is the only durable competitive advantage. Most people fail not because they lack opportunity, but because they pursue too many paths simultaneously. When you spread your energy across 10 different projects, none of them accumulate the critical mass required for explosive growth. Machiavelli advised rulers to select a single strategic line and hold it without deviation until it either produced results or proved false. But behind that necessity lies a deeper truth, accessible only to those willing to surrender the illusion of safety. Success that looks instantaneous from the outside is always the result of time compressed through discipline, the deliberate elimination of everything that does not compound toward the primary objective. If you do not consciously choose your lane, life will slot you into the slow lane by default, where the crowd sets the pace and the ceiling. Leverage requires a fulcrum, and your concentrated attention is exactly that fulcrum. Without it, you cannot move serious capital in any direction. When your identity merges completely with your area of mastery, a compounding effect emerges that outside observers casually label luck. But behind that apparent calm is a storm very few are prepared to face. Once you master your attention, you will run headlong into the single most dangerous belief in circulation, one that sounds entirely reasonable on the surface. It is the conviction that certain things are simply too expensive for you. The phrase, "I can't afford that," is not a statement of financial fact. It is a voluntary acceptance of a cage you built yourself. Machiavelli would have identified it instantly as the self-imposed limitation of someone fundamentally afraid of their own growth. In reality, nothing is inherently too expensive. There is only the price of an asset and your current level of capability, which can and must be expanded. But behind that phantom sense of safety hides the highest price you will ever pay. The moment you label something too expensive, you externalize the problem and absolve yourself of responsibility. The moment you acknowledge, instead, that you have not yet grown to the level that resource requires, you become a variable that can be improved. The penny-pinching logic that millions follow leads only to preserving the status quo and suffocating potential. Cheap tools, bad compromises, and patching the old rather than building the new represent a strategy for accumulating invisible debt. You spend irreplaceable hours trying to save marginal dollars, forgetting that time is the only asset that can never be refinanced, restructured, or recovered. But recognizing this error is only the second blow against your habitual framework. Many spend years trapped in a loop of temporary patches, waiting for circumstances to improve on their own. They hold out for the right moment to make a decisive move, make a real investment, or upgrade the quality of people around them. But circumstances do not promote you. They do not hand you 7 figures simply because you were patient. Decisions are the only mechanism that actually restructures your reality.
Those who focus on cost stay small. Those who focus on return inevitably expand beyond every boundary they previously accepted. But behind that expansion lies the unavoidable question of the true cost of your daily inaction. Most people are skilled at calculating the cost of taking action, the financial risk, the probability of loss, the worst-case scenario. But almost no one runs the numbers on the invisible cost of inaction, which compounds against you daily with ruthless efficiency. The book unread, the deal unsigned, the call never made. They do not send you an invoice tonight, but they present the bill 5 or 10 years from now, and by then, the interest is catastrophic.
Machiavelli warned that power is lost not through enemy attack, but through hesitation, waiting for better conditions that never arrive. Your future is not destroyed in one dramatic moment. It evaporates quietly, increment by increment, every time you postpone the life you committed to building. And that erosion is so gradual, so silent, that you only recognize its scale when changing course is nearly impossible. Real power lives in understanding that delay is itself a decision, one that carries the highest interest rate of any choice available. If you remain stationary while the world accelerates at an unprecedented pace, you are not standing still. You are moving backward at speed. Opportunities do not carry expiration dates. They simply vanish in the silence of your hesitation. Those at the top pay a premium for speed, early access, and proximity to the strongest players in their market. They understand with complete clarity that money can always be earned back, but lost years and surrendered positions can never be restored. But even that understanding is only a prologue to the final transformation of how you view your resources. The transition to the highest levels of power requires mastering one final skill: the art of strategic conversion. This is the ability to transform any resource into leverage. Most people are conditioned to consume what they receive for their labor, turning money into a passive object that does nothing. The strategic thinker looks at every dollar spent not as an expense, but as a seed planted to yield a return in influence, access, or intelligence. Instead of asking how to cut costs, ask how to make every expenditure an investment in your future position. Machiavelli emphasized that the wise leader always seeks to convert ordinary circumstances into instruments to reinforce power. But that transition is the final threshold in a game where the stakes escalate without pause. Consider a simple example that repeats daily: eating. The average person eats to satisfy hunger, spending a substantial portion of their budget and time on a purely biological necessity. But the person playing at the level of serious wealth converts every dinner into a business development meeting, and every restaurant into a room for expanding their influence. The same money spent on the same meal produces a completely different return: new relationships, closed deals, or access to intelligence that changes a major decision. That is conversion in its purest form, the ability to extract second and third order benefits from what everyone else treats as simple overhead. Once you see the world through that lens, you realize there are no obstacles. There are only underutilized instruments waiting to be picked up. Many people spend years receiving silence in response to their efforts, gradually sliding into despair and retreating back to their comfort zone. They make 1 or 2 attempts, encounter no feedback, and conclude their ideas are unworkable or the timing is wrong. But real strength lies in the ability to sit inside uncertainty and allow your ideas to mature under pressure, without demanding premature confirmation. Machiavelli wrote that people fail not from a shortage of opportunity, but because they abandon their path the moment clarity disappears. If you do not ask life better questions, life will supply its own answers, and those answers typically arrive as a life sentence to mediocrity. But that is the final lesson separating the executors from those rare individuals who become the true architects of their fate. Ultimately, you either choose your path with full intention, or you drift with the current and call it stability. Most people do not lose in a single, catastrophic battle. They lose through the slow accumulation of small, daily acts of neglect. Inaction feels cheap today because it demands no immediate sacrifice and no departure from the comfortable. But it presents its invoice later, denominated in lost time, eroded confidence, and rooms you will never again have the standing to enter. And one day, that pain will hit with particular force, when you encounter someone else living the exact life you promised yourself years ago. That invisible invoice always arrives at the worst possible moment, precisely when you no longer have the energy reserves to do anything about it. The defining difference between those who ascend to the top and those who watch from below is not native intelligence, nor is it blind luck. The people at the top simply begin moving while everyone else is still waiting to feel ready. Perfect readiness is a myth engineered to justify the fear of real accountability and exposure.
Forward momentum only emerges inside the act of moving, never on the safe shore of endless deliberation. The rare few capable of redirecting their lives understand that discomfort is the only reliable compass in a landscape saturated with false signals. But internalizing this truth requires a level of self-honesty that only a small fraction of people will ever sustain. If you feel that what you just heard has shifted your perspective, then the friction necessary for real growth has already begun. What you encountered here is only the surface layer of a system encompassing psychology, influence, and wealth creation. And this system has zero patience for noise or busywork. Most people will consume this material and return to living exactly as they have for the past 5 years, without changing a single variable. Only a few will choose to do the work, continuing to sharpen their thinking and deliberately separating themselves from the crowd. They understand there is no room here for empty motivation or inspirational theater. There is room only for cold, precise, executable strategy. Every decision you make today is either building your empire or reinforcing the walls of your cage. And that choice belongs entirely to you. It is inside that silence of choosing where real wealth is actually born, while the rest of the world waits for permission to succeed.